We're into the second half of our activities this morning, where we will have our feature speaker, our keynote speaker, Mr. Afra Raymond, CEO, Managing Director of Raymond and Pear, one of our more esteemed real estate organizations in this country. I think we're all familiar with Mr. Pear, so I will not be so presumptuous as to be able to introduce him and state all of his accolades. I will let him do that himself. Mr. Pear.
Okay, colleagues, good morning. And the first thing to begin with, if I could be redundant, is that I am not Pear. Pear died. Raymond is here, but there's no Pear there. There's a firm called Raymond and Pear, which I'm the CEO of, and I've been with the firm since 1978. And this subject we're talking to this morning is of the utmost importance, which the subject is really to do with the importance and the ethics of the compliance profession. So I will talk, and I will build up and put this in context. I'm rolling up my sleeves because I'm in business. I'm not wearing a jacket. Well, those of you who know me know that those suits don't fit me. So let's get to it. First of all, I want to thank Roxanne and Kingsley, who are the principals of Regional Compliance Consultants. I want to thank them for two things. I want to thank them for having the foresight and the vision to put in place and to establish the firm that we have all come to have so much esteem for, which is Regional Compliance Consultants. So we can start off by giving a round of applause for the founders of Regional Compliance Consultants. And the second thing I want to thank them for, because we have to be careful about our traditions and our culture. This is actually a discussion about culture when we talk about ethics. We have a culture of not honoring people until they're dead. It's not even funny. Somebody laughed. I don't know if it was on my left or my right, but there was a number of laughs. It's not funny. So when somebody come on dead, we say, so-and-so was a good woman, you know, so-and-so was a good man. And it is therefore important for us, as edified people, to pause now and again at particular moments and measure where we are and take our bearings and say thank you to the people who have made the effort to establish these worthwhile enterprises and have done well. So we pause. And the second point I was making, the first point was to thank them for establishing the organization. And the second point was to recognize what we are all doing here today, which is they're edified enough to call us together today in an act of memorialization while the thing is still alive, it's not dead. So we memorialize their efforts and we thank them. And it's an important tradition to recognize and nourish and carry forward. This discussion is about culture. Now, there are two worlds. I'm going to delve into a view that is necessarily binary. There are two worlds. There's a world that we see, and that is the world that is shown in the audited accounts and the compliance reports and the annual reports. And then there's a world unseen, which is the world that is not seen anywhere really, except in the big cars and the big houses and the speedboats and the jewelry. Okay? And there's a connection between those two worlds. So we have to recognize what it is we're talking about. There's a connection between those two worlds. And that connection, you might call it the boundary. I'm a surveyor. We specialize in the science of measurement. And we specialize in the measurement of boundaries. Numbers and the meaning of the numbers. That boundary between the world that is seen and the world that is unseen, where the dirty money mingles with the clean money, and where, in my definition of Trinidad and Tobago, our three words of our national motto is not discipline, tolerance, and production. In my mind, our three words are everything is everything. So the compliance profession, which is what you colleagues belong to, and you're all the leaders in the profession, the compliance profession needs to demarcate that boundary, observe that boundary, and enforce that boundary going forward as diligent compliance professionals. We, and I'm using a royal we are about building a Caribbean civilization. That's what we are about. Even if you don't know it, and even if you don't agree with me. We are about that. Okay? We are independent and edified people. We have choices and we have responsibilities. The entire enterprise that we call the Caribbean civilization was created by monstrous levels of criminality, rape, murder, slavery. In the later part, they had some indentureship for about 75 or 80 years or something. Some people try to equate the two things, but those people can't count and read and things, so it's okay. They're not the same thing. The entire enterprise of Caribbean civilization is founded on monstrous levels of criminality. My mind goes back to The Godfather, that movie, supposedly the most famous movie ever made. And at the start of the book, The Godfather is about to send away his adopted son to study law at Yale. The fellow's name is Tom Hagen. He's Irish in descent. And Tom Hagen is upset. And Tom Hagen has been playing with the young boys and growing up in the life of crime, little roughnecks. But about 17 or 18, his godfather about to send him off to Yale to do law. And he was upset. And he was crying and he was thinking there's going to be a break from the family. And his godfather just patted him, but he said, don't worry. He said, one lawyer with a briefcase could thief more money in a morning than 100 men with shotguns in a month. So you go into Yale and you're going to carry this family to the next level. That's the most important part in The Godfather. I'm going to give another cultural reference because the cultural references are important. It's a cultural discussion. The second cultural reference is from V.S. Naipaul. You know, there's this book called Miguel Street. A little boy growing up, single mother in Woodbrook. We now know it's Louis Street in Woodbrook. And he's a miserable little boy and he gets in trouble and he describes the different characters on the street. And it's a very comical book. But there's a little part of the book where there are two fellas living on the street, two men living in the same house, Hat and Bogart. And they're always doing something. They have a workshop. And they're always planing something and sanding something and painting it over and doing something. Trucks come in the night and deliver things and trucks leave in the day with things. And he's a little miserable boy. And he goes and he asks him, what it is all you're making? What it is all you're making? And they keep saying, but we can't tell you that, you know, boy. He said, what y'all making, Mr. Hart? What y'all making, Mr. Bogart? And eventually they say to him, well, you're making a thing without a name. We can't tell you what it is, but this thing we're building is a thing without a name. Until one day police came and hold the both of them. Because what they were really doing, they were breaking into houses in the big short areas, the Cascade and Sinclair, thieving people's furniture, bringing it down by these fellas in the morning, and these fellas would remodel the furniture. So the same furniture that they thief from Mr. X house, they remodel it, they change the color, they change the way the handles of the chair was and so on. And they were selling it over in town and they had a business going on. And what they were doing, of course, well, you all know it now, was layering and so on and so on. You said the language is so advanced. But what they were doing back in that book from the 1950s, they were making the thing without a name. And that is what we are doing. We are trying to uncover the thing without a name. Now, we have to understand that this is risky business. We live in a violent society, and I don't mean to sadden anybody, but we remember respectfully and mournfully, remember George, remember Khalida. We live in a very violent place where for no given reason, all kinds of stupid things can happen. So what I'm describing is a series of acts of courage, for us to do the right thing at all times, at all times. The massive levels of criminality we have in this society. If you're reading these stories in the Sunday Guardian recently about the quarrying, the illegal quarrying taking place in the country, Alan Warner's son was arrested, and so those guys are get off on some small fine and thing. Illegal logging, human trafficking, drug trafficking, those are multi-billion-dollar enterprises. Where does all that money go? I can tell you one thing for sure. It doesn't go like in the old-time movies in a suitcase, in the trunk of a car. No, that is just nonsense. The actual fact is that white-collar crime, the major white-collar crime, the one that concerns us, because I'm only concerned with major corruption. I'm not concerned with anybody at licensing taking small money to. That's a small thing. I'm concerned with the major, mega corruption. The major corruption could only take place with the participation, the knowing participation of professionals. Accountants, lawyers, engineers, architects, quantity surveyors, those are the people who make the major corruption possible. It goes through the established banks. I know there's some bankers here, no names. I know there's some bankers in the audience. And I'm seeing a network of professionals here. And in fact, all of it takes place in those channels. Therefore, you have an instrumental role, a pivotal role in dealing with this question. Because the alternative, your responsibilities are heavy. The alternative, in terms of where the society is absolute chaos. You think it's bad here now? You think it's bad here now? You probably think it's bad if you look at the papers over the last week or two, compared to 20 years ago and so on. It's not bad. It could get plenty worse. What is the FIU's role? I know there's some people here from the FIU. The FIU is a reporting and research organization, and they receive these massive reports every year about irregular transactions. The irregular transactions, going back to my prior point, the irregular transactions are not suitcases full of money. They are transactions that take place within this law firm and that law firm. That accountant signed it. It went from this bank account to that bank account. The way the banking system is now so painfully granular. Everybody knew who everybody was. And like the FIB can't follow up. Nobody ever gets arrested. I never hear about any big cases. Therefore, I want to say to you all, speaking to the group here, I want to say to you all is that benefit association. You need to form an association, a proper association, to advance these causes. Pick out the 3 biggest cases in a year and press them, let us see those people charged. Because you know who the people are. There's nobody in the bank system. You have the particulars of all of the parties in the transaction. Then, of course, there's the moral question. We're coming down to the moral question here now. Which is this. It is very easy to point a finger and to find fault when it's somebody else. So, when it's the other political party, whatever that means, or it's people who belong to the other race, whatever that means, or people who live in the other part of the country, so those people from South, or those people from Tobago, or the people from Grandy, or the people from Laventille. When it's the other group, it is desperately easy to find fault. Very easy to find fault. And to criticize. And if I coulda, woulda, shoulda. But that's not the test. Easy things are never the test. The comfort zone is the zone where nothing grows. There's nothing healthy in the comfort zone, apart from in your mind. If you want to grow, you have to come out of the comfort zone. And therefore, the question is, what would you do when it's somebody you do know? When it's somebody who was in QRC with you. Somebody who was in your class in Bishops. Somebody who was in the cadets with you. Somebody who in the lodge with you. Somebody who did A-levels with you. You all used to run ball together. What about when it's somebody you really, really know? When it's somebody you're living with, you're sleeping with, you're eating from the same pot. Somebody who's really one of your people. What do you do then? The code of practice we have at the moment in our culture, whether we like to admit it or not, the code of the practice we have at the moment in our culture is tell me before you tell on me. So if you make a report, somebody will actually say to you, well, why you going to call me and tell me that, man? You all know what I'm talking about. And I want to say, all I recognize that there are strong necessary things in our culture, like one hand can't clap, and you scratch my back and I scratch your back, and all of that stuff. That stuff took us to this point. So we now have independence. We now have more educated people than we ever had before in the society. But that stuff can't take us beyond there. We have to be prepared at some point to do the right thing, regardless of who the offender is. We have to be prepared to do the right thing, even if the person is somebody you know. Even if it's somebody in your group. Because believe me, so you see a case recently, let's talk about something topical. You see a case like the case going on right now in the papers the last 48 hours, a Chinese laundry, and the $34 million with the taxes and things. I don't know for sure because I'm not part of that circle or anything. But I could bet money that story came out because of some whistleblower. Somebody in his organization who really, really don't like what's going on. tape recorded the meeting he had with his staff, and released without him knowing. Because everybody have a phone now, so you could think all you want to think, but somebody going to record you. And release the tape recorded to the media. And that's how come the whole thing reached the media. So the point is that secrets, in a sense, really are a thing of the past. The question is, how do we negotiate our future? If you're not prepared, and I'm going to say it straightforward, if you're not prepared to sell out people in your friends and your family or people in your group, if you're not prepared to do that, as I am, and I have done it, you know that. If you're not prepared to do that, you are no different from the politicians. We are suspicious of the politicians. So when Mr. Politician, Dr. this one, or Mrs. Politician, Senior Counsel, that one, sit down in cabinet, and you are making a complaint, as I often do, about this wrongful action or that wrongful action, and they keep blocking and finding excuses, and, well, the person think, I mean, put a group to look into it, and they keep blocking and skating around the issue. And it gets us angry and frustrated, and we're asking ourselves, what the hell is this? All they are doing is the same culture. That's my partner, I can't do him that. I was trying to call him, and he didn't call me back yet, you know. When I talk to him, I'll let you know what. And that's what they're doing. The same rotten culture of giving somebody from your cohort the opportunity to skate around the truth and skate around the truth and skate around the truth. So don't tell yourself that you're any better. This is a kind of a wake-up call. Don't tell yourself you're any better than the politicians, unless and until you're prepared to turn your back on somebody you see doing the wrong thing. Because that's what this job is about. Your definition of your job description is to draw a line between the world that is seen and the world that is unseen. Those billions of dollars are going to actually drown everything that we value. They're going to drown everything. And we have to be really careful to understand that. You might think it doesn't get any worse. But I'll give an example, a short example before I wrap up, about what could happen in a situation where you lose sense of values. So many years ago, I was living in another place. We had a group. We used to organize around some of the African countries that were trying to get democracy restored in their country. And we kept a meeting. I was chairing a meeting in London with a guy who came up from Kenya, who was part of the group called Kenya. And Kenya is run by a fellow called Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's a Nobel Prize-winning African writer. And we were talking about democracy, trying to restore democracy in Kenya at that time. And Daniel Arap Moi was the Prime Minister, President of Kenya. He didn't want elections, and we were trying to bring elections there. And it was a military government. And it was an African-Caribbean audience. A few Africans were in the audience. But I was chairing the meeting, and these African blokes were there talking. So somebody in the audience asked the guy, so what is it like living in a military dictatorship? He had been in London on a scholarship. He was an educator, so he came to do his master's in education. He was a school principal from Kenya. And he said, okay, let me tell you all a story. So he said, in the morning, we got to school early, about 6:45. And we had all the children lined up. It's a primary school he was principal of. We had all the children lined up, and we sang the national song. And then we said our prayer, like what they call assembly in the Caribbean. And then a truck drove in with soldiers who were armed. The soldiers jumped out, and they picked out like 3 of the biggest girls, who were like 11, 12. The children were screaming, the teachers were screaming, and the soldiers drove off with the girls. And of course, they were frantic. They couldn't have any more school for the day. And they went looking for the girls. They went to tell their parents. And they were looking, the parents were looking for the girls. They couldn't find them anywhere. And about 3 days later, they found the girls that they'd been raped and mutilated and murdered in the forest. So the audience went very agitated. And one of the women in the audience was like, well, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you call the police? And he was like, you don't understand, that's the problem. In a military dictatorship, the police have no power. The police can stop you for driving with a flat tire. But the police have no power. The police can't go to the army base and do anything. It's a military dictatorship. You all don't understand. So one of the African Caribbean women in the audience jumped up and said, well, why didn't you do anything? At which point the guy said, well, we didn't think it was that bad. We thought they were just going to rape the girls. Everybody burst into tears, including myself. So that is his salutary story for those of you who may be navigating in a headspace, because I remember we spoke about the danger of the comfort zone. You may be navigating in a headspace where you say, it can't get any worse than this. Trust me, it can. Don't you ever tell yourself it can't get any worse. And you are the arbiter collectively, and not about individualism. Collectively, it's an ethical question. It's a professional question. You are the arbiter about what is allowed to cross that boundary line. You have to recognize the boundary. You have to enforce the boundary. You have to do your work with a sense of excellence. So thank you once again to Regional Compliance Consultants, and thank you.